Princess Soraya of the Solari Dominion stepped out of the royal shuttle and onto the landing platform of Zeltar, her violet eyes scanning the vast rebuilt moon base that floated silently over the dead surface of a planet scarred by war. Silver ceremonial robes shimmered under the soft light of twin moons, but her mind was not on peace or politics. She had returned to a home she barely remembered, to a court still broken and bitter from the war they had lost. The Dominion had once ruled half the stars, proud and unshaken. But now it stood humbled under a fragile treaty signed with the humans Earth's upstart species that had, against all odds, brought the great Solari to their knees. Heir to the throne and a symbol of unity in her youth, had lived most of her life away, hidden in neutral space to protect her from assassination or scandal. Now she was back, expected to smile and represent a dominion she no longer recognized. As she walked through the marble corridors of the summit hall, her thoughts wandered to the past, to the golden years before war when she had played in the palace gardens with a human boy named Jace Rylan. He had been quick to laugh, bold in every way, and completely unaware of the lines that divided their people. For a few years, Earth and Solari had tried to build peace, even sending children to each other's worlds as symbols of trust. Chase had been one of those children. They had been best friends once, inseparable. But when the alliance collapsed, Jace was taken away. She had never seen him again. Rumor said he died in the early days of the war. She had grieved him as one might grieve a part of themselves. Now, all that remained were faint memories and a name. Still, that name stirred something in her as she listened to the whispers that floated through the summit. Soldiers and diplomats spoke in hushed voices about the human strategists who had turned the tide of the war. They called him Spectre. No one had seen his face. No one knew his past. But the name was feared and respected, even among the Solari. He had never once lost a battle, always 3 steps ahead, always striking when no one expected. It was said he spared cities when he could, that he avoided civilian bloodshed, rarity in the brutal war that had burned across systems, and something about those stories, something about the way Spectre fought, made Soraya uneasy. That night, in her chambers overlooking the silent stars, she accessed restricted battle records using a diplomatic override. What she found were empty files, lines of blacked-out text, and corrupted voice logs. But one voice log from the war's final week had a fragment of audio, distorted and short, no more than 5 seconds, but the voice in it struck her like lightning. "Tell them, I remember the stars," it said. The words were meaningless, but the voice was not. Her heart skipped. She knew that voice. She had heard it as a child, laughing in the garden. Could it be? The next morning, the Earth delegation arrived for the summit. Among them was a tall figure in sleek black armor with no insignia. His helmet reflected the polished floor. Soraya's breath caught when the Earth ambassador asked for a private audience between her and the man called Spectre. The meeting room was cold and quiet. She waited alone, uncertain whether to be angry or afraid. Then the door opened, and he entered. He said nothing, only stood with an eerie stillness, watching her. She could feel something unspoken in the way he tilted his head, the way his hands curled, just slightly familiar, like an old rhythm she had long forgotten. Then, slowly, he raised both hands and removed his helmet. The breath rushed from her lungs. Time fell away. There he was, older, scarred, changed, but still him. Jace Rylan, alive. Soraya stepped back, heart pounding, unable to speak. Mind flooded with questions, emotions, confusion. Why had he never reached out? Why had he become a weapon? What had he done to win the war? But she said nothing. Neither did he. They stared at each other, silence stretching like a blade between them. Finally, he whispered, "I remembered the stars." In the room, seemed to vanish around them, leaving only the weight of memory and the chill of everything that had been lost. The silence between them was sharp and heavy, as Soraya stared at the man who had once been her closest friend, now standing in front of her as the most feared human in Solari memory specter, the hero who ended the war. Jace's face was older, marked by thin scars and a stillness that hadn't been there when he was a boy. And yet, beneath the quiet strength, she could still see the traces of the child who had once held her hand during palace games and whispered stories about Earth's blue skies. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke his name, and he nodded once, slowly, like a man carrying something heavy. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. Instead, he told her that after the failed alliance, Earth had pulled him back and placed him in a deep military program, one that erased his identity, his history, and trained him for wars they feared were coming. He had fought, not out of hate for the Solari, but because Earth believed they had no choice, and because he had seen, in early skirmishes, the kind of destruction the Dominion was capable of. Sierra struggled to believe that the boy who once cried when a bird fell from a tree could lead fleets and destroy armadas. She wanted to ask why he had never tried to contact her, but part of her already knew. He had to become someone else. Jace said he kept her memory alive, especially when he had to make hard choices, and that sometimes her face had stopped him from pulling a trigger. He confessed that during the war, he had asked Earth's commanders not to bomb certain Solari cities, not out of strategy, but because they reminded him of her. Soraya didn't know whether to feel touched or betrayed, and her thoughts became more tangled when he said he'd only removed his helmet because he knew she would recognize his voice, and that he couldn't lie to her, not now. Outside the meeting room, the summit buzzed with uneasy diplomacy, and rumors of the Spectre's presence began to spread among the Solari officials. Some feared him, others hated him, but none knew his real identity. Soraya, still shaken, requested access to more classified human files, and, with Jace's help, she unlocked fragments of data that showed just how much he had done to avoid civilian death during the war, how he had sacrificed tactical victories to protect Solari outposts full of families. Those quiet acts were never public. The Solari people only knew the final battle, when Spectre's forces bypassed the outer defenses and struck at the Dominion's central command, forcing surrender without firing a shot. They called it humiliation. Jace called it mercy. That night, alone in her quarters, Soraya replayed the voice log again and again, hearing his soft words. Tell them. I remembered the stars. It was a code, he explained earlier. One that meant he hadn't forgotten what they once stood for: peace, understanding, unity. But what did that matter now, when the galaxy still burned with anger, and his name stirred more fear than hope? The next day, Soraya met with the Solari Council, standing beneath the glass dome where stars swirled like silent witnesses. She didn't mention Jace, not yet. Instead, she asked questions about the true cost of war, about who truly won, and whether peace built on silence was peace at all. The older counselors gave her cautious answers, but one, a sharp-eyed general named Thalon, stared at her too long, as if guessing she knew something she shouldn't. Later, she found Jace in the observation wing, watching the stars, hands clasped behind his back, face unreadable. She told him that people deserved to know the truth, that the Spectre was not a monster, but someone who had tried, in secret, to spare lives. Jace warned her that revealing his identity could break the peace, not fix it. Earth had buried his past for a reason, and the Solari weren't ready to see a human war hero as anything but a symbol of defeat. Still, she insisted the truth mattered, even if it hurt. Jace hesitated, then said there was something else she needed to know, something not in any report. During the last week of the war, he had been sent a secret message, one that came not from Earth, But from within the Solari Dominion itself, someone had helped him bypass the final defenses. Someone from her own people had betrayed the Dominion to end the war early. Soraya froze, her mind spinning. A traitor? Why? Jace didn't know. The message had been anonymous, but his timing had made the victory possible without bloodshed. Now, with his identity in her hands and a hidden betrayal in play, Soraya stood at the edge of something much deeper than lost friendship. There were secrets in the shadows of peace, and the man beside her specter, Jace. Her childhood friend was not just the hero who ended the war. He might also be the key to stopping a new one before it began. Soraya stood in the quiet hall of the moon base, her thoughts swirling like a storm as the truth settled deeper into her chest. Jace Ryland, the boy she once trusted with her dreams, was the same man called Spectre, the human strategist who had brought the Solari Dominion to its knees. Even after hearing his words and seeing the regret in his eyes, it was still hard to accept, not because he had survived, but because he had become someone so feared, someone so changed. The weight of years separated them, but the bond they once shared still flickered beneath the silence, refusing to die. That night, Soraya left her royal chambers and went to the restricted archives with Jace, where he showed her classified war footage videos of him commanding fleets, redirecting attacks away from civilian targets, and calling off missions when the risk to innocence was too great. She watched in silence, her eyes fixed on the young commander he had become, a man shaped by duty and burden, not cruelty. One clip showed him staring at a holomap, whispering her name to himself before choosing to change the strike path, and, in that moment, Soraya felt her heart ache with something she could not name. He had never forgotten her, even when the galaxy demanded he forget everything. She looked at him in the low light of the archive room, his face hard but tired, and asked if he ever hated her people. Jace shook his head and said he hated the war, not the Solari, and that he had fought not to destroy, but to stop something worse. He told her he believed the war was started by those in power on both sides who wanted control, not peace, and that many had died to protect secrets that were still hidden. Soraya asked about the traitor who had helped him bypass Solari defenses in the final days of the war, and he said the transmission had come from inside the Dominion. But Earth had ordered him not to investigate. Peace had been achieved, and digging up betrayal could shatter everything. Still, Jace had never stopped wondering who it was. Maya promised to help him find the truth. And together, they began quietly reviewing internal records from the last month of the war, hunting for any signs of a leak, a missing report, or a name that didn't belong. At the same time, rumors spread through the summit halls that Spectre had been seen on the moon base, though no one had confirmed his identity. Tension rose among the Solari Council, and Soraya felt their eyes following her more closely each day. Then, during a diplomatic reception, Jace appeared beside her in full armor, helmet on, silent and still. He was only there to observe, he said. But the presence of the masked human strategist at a Solari event was enough to stir a storm. People stared. Some whispered, others stepped away, and then, without warning, an explosion ripped through the sidewall. Smoke and fire filled the air as figures in dark. Red cloaks stormed in with plasma blades drawn. Assassins. Chaos broke out as diplomats screamed and soldiers drew weapons. Jace reacted instantly, pulling Soraya behind a pillar and firing his pulse pistol with calm precision. One attacker lunged at her, but Jace stepped between them, taking a blade to the shoulder before blasting the enemy down. Blood stained his armor, but he kept fighting until the last attacker fell. When the smoke cleared, silence returned, heavy and stunned. Cameras had caught everything Syria, protected by the man many called a monster. And that man saving her life with no hesitation. As medics rushed in, she looked at him through the cracked faceplate of his helmet, and in that moment, she made a decision. She would not keep his identity hidden. That night, she went before the council and told them who Spectre really was. Shock and anger filled the chamber. Some counselors demanded his arrest. Others were too stunned to speak. Syria spoke clearly, her voice steady, and told them Jace Ryland was not their enemy, but someone who had tried to end the war with the least possible bloodshed. She showed them clips from the archive footage, reports of his efforts to avoid civilian deaths, and the recording of the explosion where he saved her. But the council was divided. Some feared what the people would think. Others believed she had been manipulated. Soraya stood firm. She reminded them that peace built on lies would never last. The people needed truth. And then, as she left the chamber, a message was waiting for her, a simple line, written in ancient Silari script. The Firewing Circle is watching. She froze. The Firewing Circle was a name she had heard only in whispers, a radical faction that had opposed the peace and believed the war should never have ended. If they were behind the assassination attempt, then the danger was far from over. She rushed to Jace's room and showed him the message. His expression turned dark. He said the Firewing Circle was exactly the kind of group Earth had feared might rise again, and that their reach was deeper than anyone knew. If they had infiltrated the summit, then more attacks were coming. But worse, he believed they were connected to the traitor who had helped him during the war. Maybe the same person who had ended the war was now trying to start it again, for reasons neither of them yet understood. He sat back, wounded, but Soraya looked at him and saw not just a warrior or a tactician, but the boy she once knew, the boy who had never stopped fighting for the right thing, even when the whole galaxy misunderstood him. And as the stars turned slowly outside the glass dome, Soraya made a silent promise. She would stand beside him, not just as a princess, but as a friend who remembered who he truly was, and who knew that even in a galaxy full of shadows, there were still bonds that remained unbroken. The moon base was still recovering from the attack, but beneath the surface, tension spread like smoke through a sealed room, unseen yet choking. Soraya walked with guarded steps through the marble halls, aware now that peace was only a thin curtain hiding old enemies and deeper wounds. The Firewing Circle had left its mark with blood and fire in their message. The Firewing Circle is watching, echoed in her mind like a warning drum. She knew they had roots inside the Dominion, possibly even inside the very council chambers where leaders claimed to protect peace. Still recovering from the wound he took during the attack, refused to rest, analyzing data and movement records from the summit's security systems. He was certain the attackers had help from inside, perhaps a staff member or a counselor, and Soraya feared he was right. They traced the entry logs and found a gap. Someone had disabled the West Quadrant sensors 10 minutes before the attack, and that override required high-level clearance. The betrayal was no longer a theory. It was real. Meanwhile, outside the summit, Solari citizens began hearing rumors that the human war hero, Spectre, had saved their princess. Some feared him, others questioned what they'd been told about the war. But many began to wonder if the hero they hated was also the reason they were still alive. Within days, scattered protests broke out, some calling for truth, others demanding the removal of humans from Solari space. The balance was breaking. At a midnight meeting, Syria and Jace sat in the observation wing, away from curious eyes. The stars above them seemed to spin more slowly now, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. Jace told her he had cross-checked the signal used in the war's final betrayal and the override used before the summit attack. They were the same. Whoever helped him end the war was now helping the Firewing Circle. Soraya felt a chill. It didn't make sense. Why would someone stop the war only to reignite it? Unless they never wanted peace, only control. She remembered something her father once said when she was a child, that the most dangerous enemy is the one who walks beside you and smiles. She thought of the counselors, the aides, the guards. Anyone could be the traitor. The next day, General Dallin, the same sharp-eyed counselor who had always doubted the peace, requested a private meeting with her. She agreed, but only with Jace watching from a hidden room nearby. Dallin spoke calmly, asking questions about the humans, about Spectre, about Jace. He said there were forces on the council unhappy with her choices, that many felt she was being manipulated by an old friend wearing a hero's mask. But then Dallin leaned forward and said something strange. Peace is not found in weakness. Sometimes the fire must return before the stars can shine. The words were almost the same as those in the Firewing Circle's old manifestos. Soraya kept her face still, but her heart pounded. After he left, Jace emerged and confirmed it. Those words were used in early transmissions from Firewing members during the war. Dallin was either working with them or he was one of them, but accusing him would risk everything. He was powerful, respected, and clever. They needed proof, so they began a quiet plan. Soraya hosted a private council dinner, inviting Dallin and a few others, while Jace accessed the internal surveillance and linked into Dallin's private comms. At the dinner, Soraya acted calm, but her questions were careful, aimed to pull loose threads. Dallin didn't flinch. He laughed, made jokes, shared war stories. But his device, hidden in his coats, sent a brief, encrypted messages during the meal. Jace tracked the signal, bounced across 3 relay points, and vanished. But not before revealing its target. A hidden station orbiting a dead moon, a place used during the war for secret meetings. Jace wanted to go. Syria wanted to go with him. He refused at first, but she insisted. This was her people, her future, and she wouldn't sit in safety while others fought for her. So they left that night, taking a stealth shuttle registered under an old diplomatic code. The flight was silent, tense. They didn't speak much, but the bond between them had grown stronger, past pain, past betrayal, past doubt. When they arrived, the station was cold and quiet, floating like a forgotten memory in deep space. They slipped aboard through an emergency hatch and found the main control room sealed. Inside were computers still running, files stored under code names, and in one corner, a holorecorder left active. Jace played the last file. A hooded figure appeared, speaking with a voice altered by a machine. The princess must be made to see that peace with humans is weakness. If she won't step aside, she will be removed. Soraya's breath caught. They had planned to kill her long before the summit attack. Jace found logs showing shipments of weapons moved in secret to key locations inside the Dominion. Firewing agents were preparing for something large. And then they heard a sound of footsteps. Someone else was on the station. They shut down the recorder and ducked behind the control panels as 2 armed figures entered, speaking Solari quickly, unaware of their presence. Jace moved like a shadow, disabling one with a shock pulse while Soraya distracted the other, grabbing his arm long enough for Jace to knock him out. When they checked the prisoners, one of them wore a council-level badge, a direct link. They had enough now. Proof of the Firewing Circle's plan, of Dallin's connection, and of the weapons being moved to spark a new war. They returned to the moon base just before dawn and called an emergency session of the full council. Before the chamber, Soraya stood with calm strength, revealing the messages, the footage, and the plans. When Dallin stood to deny everything, Jace entered the chamber, helmet off, face visible, holding the prisoner's ID chip in his hand. The silence was crushing. Talon tried to speak again, but the council guards moved to arrest him. The fire had been hiding in plain sight. As he was taken away, Talon turned to Soraya and said, "You can't stop what's coming." But Soraya looked him in the eye and said, "Then we'll meet it together." That night, as stars burned quietly above the moon base, Soraya and Jace stood alone, knowing that peace was never safe. never still, but that it was worth defending. The shadows had come, and the truth had nearly been buried, but together they had pulled it back into the light. The arrest of Counselor Thalen sent shockwaves across the Dominion, but Soraya knew the danger was not over. It had only changed shape, gone deeper, quieter, and more careful. The Firewing Circle had lost a key member, but its roots were tangled within the very system meant to protect the peace, and the more Soraya and Jace searched, the more they uncovered signs that the enemy was not just hiding in shadows, but walking freely through the highest halls of power. In the days that followed, several counselors expressed a sudden interest in stepping down or transferring duties to aides. And while the public believed it was stress or age, Soraya and Jace saw the signs of fear, people hiding from something or someone. Meanwhile, the security chief, Commander Reyes, began avoiding direct reports and gave excuses when asked about investigations into the attack on the summit. Jace grew suspicious and followed his movements through hidden cameras and access logs, discovering that Reyes had met with a mysterious figure whose identity was masked by high-level encryption. Someone who had been aboard the station orbiting the dead moon 3 months ago before the summit. This suggested planning long before anyone even guessed that Soraya would return to politics. And it meant one thing: the Firewing Circle had been preparing to strike for much longer than they had realized. Late one night, Jace and Soraya intercepted a coded message meant for Reyes. It was brief, just 6 words. Phase 2 begins at dawn tomorrow. That single line changed everything. Soraya called an emergency defense council, but only invited a few trusted members, unsure who else could be turned. Time running out, she and Jace searched the base for clues about what Phase 2 could be. They found security routes altered, certain armory logs deleted, and 2 Solari ships loaded with weapons listed for diplomatic training, a phrase Jace recognized from wartime tactics as a cover for covert deployment. The real horror came when they found a secret command code buried in the system, a line that would shut down all external communications the moment it was triggered. Whoever was behind it planned to cut the base off completely. Soraya knew if that happened, not only would outside help be impossible, but the Firewing Circle could control the narrative, making it look like a Solari civil conflict or a human betrayal. As the artificial daylight cycle began to rise over the moon base, Soraya stood before the glass dome and wondered if this would be her last dawn. Case stood beside her, calm but focused, already dressed in his tactical armor. He told her she didn't have to stay for what was coming, but she simply looked at him and said, "This is my fight too." Minutes later, an explosion shook the south wing of the base. The alarms screamed to life, and emergency teams scrambled. But Jace noticed the alert system didn't include internal lockdown. That was intentional. Whoever triggered the blast wanted chaos, but not too much, just enough to cover their real move. He and Soraya raced to the command center, only to find it locked down from within. Commander Reyes was inside, flanked by 4 soldiers wearing the red-trimmed uniforms once linked to the old Firewing Guard, long thought disbanded. Through the glass, he looked at Soraya and smiled coldly. "You should have stayed quiet, princess," he said through the speaker. Then, the power cut across the base. Emergency lights flickered to life. Jace immediately switched to his backup link and activated a manual override on the control panel near the wall. Sparks flew, and the lock hissed open. A firefight broke out, short, brutal, and close. Jace moved like lightning, shielding Soraya while taking down 2 guards with precision shots. Soraya, though untrained in combat, grabbed a pulse blade from the floor and struck another soldier when he charged at Jace from behind. The final blow came when Reyes tried to shoot Soraya, but she ducked as Jace tackled him and disarmed him with a swift twist of the wrist. Breathing heavily, they stood over him as he muttered, "It's too late. They're already here." With the control room secured, they restored power and the main screen lit up, showing that 3 Solari destroyers, supposedly assigned to a peaceful tour, had suddenly gone dark and changed course, heading toward the central communication relay orbiting Solari Prime. If they destroyed that relay, the Dominion would be cut off from its colonies for days, long enough for a coup to begin. Soraya realized this was Phase 2-9, just taking the summit, but silencing the entire Dominion. She issued an immediate override command, redirecting defense satellites to intercept, but the system flagged her command as unauthorized. Jace dug deeper and found the system had been reprogrammed to ignore royal authority. Only one person could still change the orders, someone high enough to approve security changes. The Chief Technology Minister, Saran Val. Saran had never seemed dangerous, but Jace reminded Soraya that during the war, it worked on encryption for the Dominion and once built a signal cloaking device for stealth missions. If he had joined the Firewing Circle, he could control the entire information network. With no time left, they raced to his quarters. The corridors were quiet now, too quiet, as if the moon base had fallen into a breathless silence. When they reached Saran's door, it opened without resistance. But inside, they found only a recording. Saran speaking calmly, saying he was leaving to join the real future of the Dominion. He had escaped. But the recording contained coordinates, perhaps left behind in arrogance, or as a challenge. Jace copied the data and locked down the base with new security codes. Then, with permission from Soraya, he called in a human strike vessel, a fast ship known for stealth and speed. They couldn't trust Solari ships, not now, until they knew who else was compromised. The human vessel arrived, sleek and silent. Soraya looked once more at the moon base, the place where she thought peace would bloom, now the center of a growing war from within. She felt a fire rising in her chest, not of anger, but of purpose. She had trusted the wrong people once, but now she would not let the lies win. As they boarded the vessel, she and Jace stood at the bridge and set a course for the coordinates. They didn't know what they would find. Maybe a hidden base, maybe the Firewing leadership, maybe just more traps. But they were no longer just searching for traitors. They were fighting for the soul of the peace itself. As the stars stretched out before them, Soraya knew the hardest part was yet to come. Not the war, but what would come after. Because if they didn't win, there would be no future left to save. The human vessel sliced through the silence of deep space like a ghost. Kay, leaving the light of the moon base behind and carrying Princess Soraya and Jace, the man once known only as Spectre, toward the final coordinates left by the traitorous minister Saran Val. And neither of them spoke much during the journey, because both of them understood that what lay ahead would not just decide the fate of the Dominion or the fragile peace between humans and Solari. It would decide whether truth and sacrifice still had any meaning in a galaxy where power so easily bent the past into lies. And as the ship approached the shadowy region marked on the map, an old mining zone long declared dead, they discovered a small station camouflaged against the rock of a hollowed asteroid, its signal barely detectable beneath the layered encryption codes. And when Jace unlocked it using the fragments of old Firewing codes he remembered from wartime missions, they slipped close and boarded in silence, weapons drawn, hearts steady, and found that the station was no abandoned outpost, but a hive of activity, with crates marked for military delivery, weapons lined in cold racks, and plans showing Dominion cities marked in red, all arranged with terrifying precision for a second war that had not yet begun, but was moments from being unleashed. And as they moved deeper, they heard voices, 5 leaders of the Firewing Circle, speaking around a table in the command room. Unaware they were being watched, arguing over the timeline, the betrayal of Reyes, and how Saran had promised a communication relay would be destroyed by now, but he had failed. And now they had no choice but but to activate the final stage, a planet-wide signal that would crash the Solari government systems and trigger martial law under their hand-picked commanders. And Soraya turned to Jace and whispered that if they let them finish, everything would fall in minutes. But Jace already knew, already had a plan. And as the leader stood and prepared to issue the final command, Jace dropped a signal jammer, throwing the room into flashing red lights while Soraya activated the emergency seal to trap the command crew inside. But one of the Firewing guards spotted her through the glass and opened fire, shattering the silence with chaos, forcing Jace to shield her as they fell back toward the main core, dodging blasts, locking doors, cutting power lines to slow the chase, all while sending live footage from the station back to trusted contacts in the Moon Base and Earth Command, exposing the names, the plans, and the truth of everything they had uncovered. And for the first time, the lies of the Firewing Circle cracked under the weight of their own arrogance, but their desperation made them dangerous. And one of the enemy warships hidden nearby picked up the signal and moved in to destroy the station before the transmission could finish. And Jace knew they couldn't stop it in time, not with the station's shield generators locked by voice code. But there was one more way. Manually triggered the overload. Used the blast to destroy the incoming ship and the command hub in one move. But someone had to stay behind to arm it while the other escaped. And when Jace said he would do it, Soraya's heart dropped like a stone, begging him to find another way. But he just looked at her with the same calm he had worn since the day she first saw him on the battlefield, and said, "This was always the end of the road for me." And though her hands trembled, she knew he was right. Because the war had stolen everything from his name, his peace, his future. This was the only way he could make it right. Not as a soldier, not as Spectre, but as Jace, the boy she had once known and still loved. And she kissed him once, softly, not as a goodbye, but as a promise that his story would not be buried like the rest. Then she ran as he told her to, boarding the escape shuttle as the station shook behind her and light flared across the void. And when the transmission ended, and the Firewing fleets saw the proof of their betrayal burn across public channels, their support shattered within hours, and the remaining loyalists surrendered or fled. And days later, the council met again on the moon base. The chair once offered to Jace remained empty, covered in a simple white cloth, not as a symbol of loss, but of truth. For his name could finally be spoken without fear. Jace Orion, the human who ended a war, who saved a princess, and who gave his life not for a crown or a banner, but for peace. And though the galaxy moved forward, and new leaders rose, and the Firewing Circle was hunted to its end, stories of the nameless soldier who became a hero without a crown spread among both human colonies and Solari worlds, carried by whispers, by memories, and by one woman who would never let his story fade. Because Soraya, now Queen of the Unified Dominion, kept his name etched in the Hall of Flame and Stone, where children asked why a princess would kneel before a soldier statue. And their teachers would answer, because sometimes the truest kings wear no crowns. And as stars burned on and peace held for the first time in generations, the galaxy finally learned that the most powerful force was not a weapon or an army, but the courage of one heart, standing in silence, ready to give everything so others could live free.